Hi everybody, so today I'm going to be reading one of the Mr. Men collection books. So, if you haven't seen, we've already finished Mr. Happy. Mr. Sneeze and Mr. Messy. And here we have a couple more books left. So let me choose Mr. Nosey. So let's start. Mr. Nosey liked to know all about everything that was going on. He was always poking his nose into other people's business. Mr. Nosey was the kind of person who, if they came upon a locked door, couldn't resist looking through the keyhole to see why the door had been locked. Mr. Nosey was the kind of person who, if he found an unopened letter addressed to someone else, would simply have to open it and find out what was inside. Mr. Nosey was the kind of person who, if he was sitting reading his paper on a train, would much rather read the paper of a person sitting next to him. Naturally, as you can see, Mr. Nosey was not very popular. People did not like the way in which Mr. Nosey would peek and pry into their affairs. They did not like it at all. But did that stop Mr. Nosey from peeking and prying? It did not. Mr. Nosey lives in a place called Tiddletown. One day, the people of Tiddletown decided that Mr. Nosey was becoming much too nosy, and so they held a meeting to discuss what to do about him. "We must find some way to stop him from being so nosy," said old Mr. Chips, said the town's carpenter. "That's right," said Mrs. Washer, who ran the Tiddletown laundry. "He needs to be taught a lesson." "If only we could think of a way to stop him poking his nose into everything," said Mr. Brush the painter. And then a small smile spread across his face. "Listen," he said, now grinning, "I have a plan." All his friends gathered around to listen to his plan. The following morning, Mr. Nosey was out walking along the high street in Tiddletown when he had heard somebody whistling behind one of those closed doors. "I wonder what's going on there," he thought to himself, and tiptoed up to the door. He quietly opened it and peeped in. Splash went a very wet paintbrush right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose, covering it with a bright red paint. "Oh dear, I am sorry," said Mr. Brush, who was painting inside of the door. Poor Mr. Nosey had to go straight home, try to remove the red paint, which was very difficult and rather painful. Mr. Brush chuckled to himself. The following day, Mr. Nosey was walking past the laundry when he had heard somebody laughing on the other side of the wall. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and standing on tiptoe, he looked over the wall. Snap went a clothespin right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose. "Oh dear, I am sorry, said Mrs. Washer, who was hanging up clothes on a washing line on the other side of the wall. Poor Mr. Nosey removed the clothespin and went off down the street feeling extremely sorry for himself and his poor red nose. Mrs. Washer chuckled to herself. The plan was working. Next day, Mr. Nosey was going past the fence when he heard hammering. I wonder what's going on here, he thought to himself, and creeping very quietly to the end of the fence, he peeped around. Bang! Went a hammer right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose. Oh, I dear am sorry, said old Mr. Chips, who was nailing up a loose plank in the fence. Poor Mr. Nosey had to go home immediately and bandage his poor sore red nose. Mr. Chips grinned a broad groan. The plan was working very well indeed. I feel bad for Mr. Nosey. Well, actually, he kind of deserves that for being very nosy. The following day, Mr. Nosey was walking in the woods when he heard somebody sawing the wood. I wonder what's going on there, he thought to himself and crept up behind a tree. He was just about to peer from behind the tree when it suddenly occurred to him that if he did, something very nasty might happen to his nose. And so he went on his way without being noisy. I guess he learned his lesson. Behind the tree, with a saw raised in his hand, stood Mr. Herd, the farmer. When he saw that Mr. Nosey has gone his way without being nosy, he laughed and laughed and laughed. The plan had worked. Mr. Herd hurried into Tilltown to tell everybody. The plan had really worked, because after that, Mr. Nosey had stopped being nosy and soon became very good friends with everybody in Tilltown. And that is the end of the story, except to say that if you are ever tempted to be as nosy as Mr. Nosey used to be, you'd better expect one thing: a sore nose. Bye everyone, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't be nosy. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and like this video and like all my videos on YouTube too. Follow me in Instagram and tell your friends to follow me if they like books. Bye! We're going to do more of books, Mr. Man collection books. Bye!